Welcome back to the High Ticket Woman. I'm Debbie Caudle. Today's episode is another question and answer episode. And I love these episodes. They're some of my favorite because these are real questions. They come from the real lives of real people navigating real relationship challenges. So if you're listening and you find yourself thinking, that sounds just like my situation. Is she talking about me? How does she know? Well, I want you to know the reason it might sound familiar to you is because you're not alone in these problems. These are really common relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to do two things as you listen. First, I want you to really pay attention to what part of these questions, these situations is really stirring something inside of you. Okay. There's a question that might hit a nerve, right? And that usually means that there's something in there that where there's something important that you need to hear. That there's value in there for you. And second, if you have a question of your own, if this prompts you to go, "Oh, I really wish Debbie would answer this thing over here," then you can always send me your question. You can go to Debbie at debbiecaudle.com and give me just a little bit of context. Tell me it's for the Q&A podcast episodes. I read every message that is sent to me, every comment that's put down below in the podcast notes. And many of these questions come from you, from what you share with me. So with that, let's dive in. We have 2 questions today, both really, intriguing questions that I think get really to the heart of a lot of, again, common issues. So here's the first question. My husband grew up with hired help, and he never had to do much around the house. Now that we're married, I feel like everything falls on me. I can't tell if he's being lazy or if he just genuinely doesn't see what needs to be done. How do I address this without sounding critical or resentful? Really fascinating question. And I'll tell you, there's a little bit more to this story than what the question, conveys, and I did ask this woman a little bit more information to get more context. So here's this nuance that I think we need to add in here because it really matters, and I really want you to hear the assumptions that she was making that until I pointed this out to her, because 'cause I've answered her question privately already. Um, Once I pointed this out to her, it gave her a new way of thinking, all right? So in her particular situation, because he grew up with hired help, okay, he wasn't necessarily refusing to help out of selfishness or a sense of entitlement. What was actually happening here is that he grew up in a home where tasks were outsourced or delegated. The family had more money maybe than the average, American family. So in his internal wiring, handling something, in the yard or inside the home didn't automatically mean that he had to personally do it. But for her, it was completely the opposite. She grew up in a typical home. And for her, being responsible meant doing the work with your own hands. If the lawn needs to be mowed, you don't hire it out. You go out there and you mow the lawn. If the house needs to be cleaned, you clean it. And this distinction really, really matters. Okay. Because for him, responsibility might look like just making sure it gets handled, not physically doing it himself. But for her, very, very different operating system. For her, it's you do it yourself, okay? And so what was happening in this situation is that she was thinking, "He's he's lazy. He doesn't care about helping me. He's okay with me doing everything. He expects me to do everything." But from his perspective, he was going, "What's the problem? It's being handled. I don't need to do it myself. I don't even need to necessarily know what needs to be done. I trust you to handle it. And of course, she was interpreting that as, oh man, that's just one more thing I've got to do. Now, neither of them was necessarily trying to be hurtful to the other in the way that they were communicating about this. They were just simply speaking different internal languages. Okay. And this happens so much in marriage. This is where a lot of resentment quietly builds. Okay. Neither of you are trying to be malicious to the other, but there are these unspoken expectations and mismatched, misaligned expectations. Okay. She expects him to get his hands dirty. He expects her to take care of it, whatever that looks like. He's not saying you've got to do it yourself. He never said that, but that was an assumption she was making. So instead of framing the conversation as from her perspective, why won't you help me? A way to change that up so they have a different conversation might sound like this. I need support with this specific task. And I need us to decide together how we're going to handle it. Now, what that does is it opens the door to a different kind of solution. So she might say something like, I can't do all of this alone. And if that's what you're expecting, it's impossible. I've got all these other responsibilities. But if that's not what you're saying, if you're not saying I need to do it directly, then I need us to talk about outsourcing this. I can't keep absorbing this, you know, more tasks onto myself. And I get that you don't want to be bothered with it. I get that, you just want it handled. So so tell me what how you do want this done if you're not going to do it and I certainly don't have time to do it. Now, that's she's no longer being passive aggressive, okay? Because passive aggressiveness looks like on the outside, I'm gonna agree, "Okay, fine, I'll just do it," but internally, I'm seething. I'm not happy. She's not being demanding. She's not saying, "You need to do it yourself. You need to find someone to do it. You need to stop asking me to do it." No, instead what she's doing by changing up this dialogue is she's saying, "I need clarity. I can't do it myself. The kids already have more than enough on their plates. So either you're going to do it or we're going to hire somebody. How do you want to handle this? Clarity. Okay. And what that does is it honors the reality of how he's wired, but it also honors her need to not be so stressed and overwhelmed and overburdened. Okay. She's saying, I recognize that it's not in your wheelhouse to want to do these things. No problem. I can't do them myself. I'm not gonna put it on the kids to do it. So the only alternative is for us to hire this out, okay? And this is where a lot of couples get stuck. They frame instead of doing it this way, they frame the issue as a moral failure. Like, "You're a bad person. You are lazy. You" fill in the blank, right? We just love to attach labels, don't we? Labels just simplify everything and give us a frame of reference to understand why our spouse isn't the way we want them to be. But labels are damaging. Labels give us a snapshot, an oversimplified explanation of why our spouse is thinking, feeling, or behaving a certain way instead of coming at it from, hey, this is a logistical problem. I don't have time. The kids are busy. You don't want to deal with it. I get that. That's how you were raised. So, how are we going to actually solve this problem? Instead, she was moralizing the issue. Ah, he's lazy. He's a bad person. He's not supporting me. We have to stop doing that. We have to start managing the problem as a couple, collaborating. We're partners here. How are we going to fix this problem? You're not a bad person. I'm not a bad person. But this problem is getting in the way. Right. And here's the key. Delegating is not the same as avoiding responsibility. If he's willing to financially support hiring help, outsourcing whatever this task is, that's him being responsible, just not in the way that she expected. And that's okay. Mental and emotional and physical loads don't have to fall solely on her shoulder or on his shoulders. You can hire things out. That's something that I've had to learn in my own life. Again, we attach meaning to things like, if I hire a housekeeper to help me around the house, then I'm a bad wife. No, I'm not. It just means I'm prioritizing my time in a way that allows me to expend my energy in the best possible way. When I stop moralizing that decision, I can let go of, the need to do it all, be super wife, because I can't be, right? And then just go let someone else take care of the things that I don't necessarily want to carve out time to do. So same thing, all right? That clarity, what getting clear with yourself about what you really want and need, and then clarity with your partner, that's what allows for cooperation instead of conflict. Okay. Now, what can she take away? Well, actually, let me shift gears here. What can you take away? Let's say your spouse did not grow up with hired help, but is still refusing to help you. 'Cause now that's something a little bit different, but it's still pretty common. Okay. And again, that issue still sits at the, shall we say, the intersection of how you guys were raised and what your expectations are and those unspoken assumptions, right? I grew up this way, therefore I expect that, we're going to do it in our marriage the same way that my mom and dad did it. But I haven't talked to you about that. So I'm assuming that when you don't help me, it means you don't care, you don't love me, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. And this isn't just about chores, right? This is about any time we aren't clear about what we really want and need and why, where that came from. When and where did you decide that that's how it should be in your marriage? And now you're assuming that your spouse knows that. You haven't communicated it. And now you're judging and attaching a label to your spouse because they're not doing it the way you expected them to do it. Okay. So what happens often in situations where your spouse isn't helping out around the house as much as you want them to is that you start doing more. Not because they necessarily asked you to, but because in your mind you might think, well, it's easier than just I don't want to fight about it, right? I've asked before, nothing happened, nothing changed, so I'm just gonna do it. I've asked for the dishes to be put in the dishwasher. They're still not being put in the dishwasher. Fine, I'll just put them in the dishwasher. But then, a little bit of resentment gets planted inside your brain and, you're doing the dishes, but inside your brain, you're grumbling, right? Like, why can't they just do this? Why can't they just put their own dishes in the dishwasher? Why do I always have to be the one to do it? And frustration sets in. And so then that bleeds over into the ways that you talk to your spouse going forward, right? Conversations become emotionally charged. It starts to feel personal. This is where the labels come in. You don't care about me. You don't respect me. You think that I'm supposed to do all this by myself. And for women, that's when we tend to internalize that message. If he wanted to help me, he would. He's not helping me. Therefore, he doesn't love me. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't care. But the truth is more nuanced than that, almost always, okay? Believe it or not, your husband may not be avoiding responsibility intentionally. He may just genuinely not see it, prioritize it, or understand how much it weighs on you. I once read an article written by a man of all things, where he said that men suffer from a disease called male dirt blindness. And I do think there's an element of truth to that. But I think what it really speaks to is that we are so different from each other gender-wise. I mean, I think women have much greater peripheral, uh, perspective when it comes to looking around the home and seeing what needs to be done, and men see what's right in front of them. So a lot of times, we're assuming that they see what needs to be done, and they're just choosing not to do it because they don't care. But it's not true. Over and over and over, I worked with couples where that's not true. Now, it doesn't make it acceptable, doesn't mean that you just have to live with that, tolerate it, but it does change how you now talk to him about it. So instead of framing the issue as, "Why don't you help me?" which often sounds like an accusation, even if that's not what you're intending, saying something more like, "Hey, I really need us to be more intentional about how we share responsibilities around the home. I'm feeling stretched, I'm feeling overwhelmed, and I really don't want this to turn into resentment on my part." Okay? This does 2 things. It tells your spouse the emotional impact this is having on you without attacking him or without him feeling attacked. And secondly, it invites partnership. Let's talk about this together instead of defensiveness. Because the moment you say something like, "Why don't you help me? You never help me." He's backed into a corner, only one way out of the corner, right? He's going to come out fists flying verbally. That's not true. I do help. I just loaded the dishwasher this morning, right? Okay. So you as a woman have to get really, really clear. Yes, you need to talk about how this is making you feel, but then you also need to say, "Here's what I need very specifically. Can we talk about how to meet this need together?" Right? No hints, ladies. You cannot beat around the bush. You cannot expect your husband to read your mind. You cannot hint, imply, all of those other adjectives, hoping that he'll notice, okay? Or assuming that he should just know. And if I had a buck for every time a woman has said to me, "He should just know," I would be retired already. I would be beyond wealthy. But think about how silly that really is. I expect him to read my mind. That's a whole lot easier than me just telling him exactly what I need and why I need it. Doesn't make any sense when you hear it out loud, does it? Clarity sounds more like, "Hey, when the dishes pile up or when the trash goes out late, I feel like I'm carrying this mental load alone, and I really need you to take ownership of some of these things specifically." Be specific so that we are sharing the responsibility. That's not nagging, ladies. That's leadership. That's you owning the problem and asking for partnership to solve the problem. Now, if you are married to a man who is still unwilling to change after you have been very, very clear, that's different. That's different from a man who's never been asked clearly. Okay. If you've been clear, kind, and consistent and still nothing changes, that's important information. But if you've been hinting, hoping, and meanwhile doing it all yourself until the resentment, frustration has just really grown deep inside of you, then the issue may not be unwillingness on his part as much as it is unspoken expectations within you, okay, that you've not communicated or you've not communicated in a really clear, specific way. And this is also where boundaries come in. Remember, a boundary isn't a threat, it's a statement of what you will and won't do or carry. So, for example, a good boundary statement would be, "I can't keep managing all of this alone. If we're gonna function as a team, we need a different system. I'm not gonna keep loading the dishes all on my own. I'm not going to be the one responsible for all of the yard work. I'm not gonna keep doing it." That's a boundary. That's not controlling, that's honest. So, if you feel like you are the household manager in your marriage instead of a partner, ask yourself, please, 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 have you really communicated honestly and clearly what the problem is, why it's a problem, and very specifically what you need from your spouse so that you don't feel resentful, so that connection is restored? Or are you making assumptions? Are you drawing the wrong conclusion about what your husband really thinks and feels? And then those assumptions are bleeding over into how you talk to him. Okay. I challenge you to start a different kind of conversation with your husband, one that's rooted in clarity, shared responsibility, and respect, because that's where real change in your marriage is going to start. Now, before we go any further, before we jump into the second question, let's just pause for a moment. All right. If you're listening and going, yeah, this sounds like my marriage. Well, you don't have to just accept that this is how it is. And I know some of you are thinking, I've tried all of this. It didn't work. It's, you're still clinging to the assumptions that you're making about your husband. I'm here to tell you that I have worked with couples who are deeply, deeply stuck in these cycles of miscommunication, resentment, emotional distance, and you don't have to stay stuck. Okay. That's why I created Marriage in Bloom. These patterns, these cycles that are existing in your marriage aren't because you don't love each other. They're because you don't yet have the tools to understand what's actually happening beneath the surface of these conversasations. Okay. We Once we figure that out, what is underlying the breakdown in communication here, because a lot of therapy focuses just on communication. Marriage in Bloom goes underneath that. Okay. So the work that we do inside Marriage in Bloom, it eliminates blame. We're not gonna point fingers. We're not gonna say one of you is better or worse than the other. We're just gonna start creating awareness and clarity, and then start to learn how to respond differently to each other. If that resonates with you and you go, "Yeah, I need I need that," you can learn more at debbiecaudle.com/marriage in bloom. Okay, let's keep going. We've got a second question here today, and the question goes like this. My husband said I could decide about seeing his family, then got angry when I did. All right. So this question comes from a woman who is deeply confused and hurt. Her husband has ongoing conflict with his parents, and things have been tense for a while. And with the holidays coming up, he recently told her, "You can decide whether or not we go over there to visit for the holidays." So she took him at his word and she did decide. And based on how she and their children, this is a second marriage for him. So based on how she and her children have been treated, or how she perceives they're being treated by the parents, she chose not to go. And then all of a sudden everything changed. Now she says he's angry, he's distant, and he's accusing her of putting him in an impossible situation, of making him choose between his wife and his family. And she's sitting there thinking, Wait a second. You gave me the right to make this decision. Why am I now being punished for this?" Well, what's happening here is that this is one of those moments where it felt like she was given a choice, but she really wasn't. Okay? Emotionally, what he did was he shifted responsibility onto her. Okay? He handed her the decision to go visit or not visit, but he didn't give her the the emotional consequences that came with it. Okay? So he said, "You can decide," but in other words, he wanted her to carry the weight of the choice, but not because he really wanted her to make the choice. He didn't want to make it for himself. There's an important distinction there. Okay? When someone says you decide, but then they become resentful or angry when you actually do, they're not really giving you a choice, right? They're just displacing the emotion of that choice onto you. And why is he doing that? Well, clearly he's uncomfortable confronting his family. He's conflicted. He's torn between loyalty to his wife and loyalty to his parents. And so instead of him just sitting with that discomfort, he unconsciously hands it to his wife. So now she's expected to manage not just her own emotions, but manage his too. And that puts her in a really hurtful and difficult place because now in her mind it feels like, well, if I speak up, I'm the bad person here. And if I stay silent, I'm not being true to how I really feel in this situation. It's kind of a betrayal of myself. If I protect my family from, the hurt that these parents have caused all of us, including my husband, then I'm being accused of causing division. And that's an impossible situation for her to be put in. And what's going to happen over time is that this dynamic, like so many other things, is going to really break down trust between them. Not because of the conflict between the in-laws specifically, but because it between her and her husband, it starts to feel emotionally unsafe. And emotional safety is absolutely key. It's the foundation on which every dialogue happens. Can I really open up to you? Can I really talk to you about how I really feel? Nope, I can't. So I'm just going to stay quiet. Your marriage can't thrive when one of you is expected to absorb all the emotional fallout so that the other person doesn't have to face discomfort. Okay. Now, if I was talking to the husband, I would tell him, look, healthy leadership isn't you avoiding conflict and putting it on your wife. You have to face difficult situations together. So a healthier approach from him might sound like, look, I'm struggling here. I don't want conflict with my parents, but I also don't want you to feel unsafe or unsupported. I love you and I care about our family. I need to think about this. I need to decide what's best. I'm not going to put this on you. I'm not going to, make you make this decision and then blame you for it. I need to own it. And maybe after thinking about it, he comes back and says, look, you don't have to go. I get why you don't wanna go. I I need to maintain connection with my parents. I need to figure this out between them. I don't wanna just write them off. Let's talk about what that feels like for you, and have open dialogue, you know? And then she might a healthy response from her might be, "Look, I really wanna support you, but I can't be the one absorbing the tension or being blamed for decisions that affect both of us. I understand that you wanna stay connected to your parents, you know, they've really hurt you, and that's hard for me to deal with, but I understand that you need to try." Okay? So now that's partnership. Now we're having this back and forth conversation. And, maybe you have to agree to disagree about how, you know, about what the right thing to do is in this situation, but at least you're talking from that place of, I want to hear you. I want, both of you. I want to hear what you have to say and I need to be heard, right? Because this situation really isn't about the holiday visit. It's about being honest. It's about emotional leadership. It's about both of you, rather than avoiding hard conversations, about sitting down and saying, here's what's really going on inside of me. You don't have to fix it, but I do want to open up and share this with you and not put this on you as a burden. Okay. When you don't do that, that's where resentment and emotional distance and loss of trust and confusion about roles within the marriage, that's the genesis of all of that. Okay. You got to be willing to tolerate discomfort to get clarity. It's interesting how these questions really dovetail into each other, right? Sometimes love means saying, I'm going to stand beside you, but I'm not going to do this for you. Okay, so as we wrap up today, again, if If any of these situations really resonate with you, it doesn't mean your marriage is broken. Everybody deals with these things to one degree or another. There is opportunity, however, for you to renegotiate how responsibility and loyalty and emotional labor are shared in your marriage. And when you do that work, okay, when you renegotiate those things with honesty and humility, then that's what strengthens your marriage as opposed to weakening it. So I want to leave you with this final thought. Believe it or not, most relationship pain doesn't come from malice. Your spouse isn't out to get you. It comes from misunderstanding. Again, unspoken expectations and emotional patterns that have existed maybe for decades, that maybe existed prior to your marriage. So, if if today's questions have really resonated with you, really stirred something in you, maybe triggered some discomfort or recognition or even just relief, like, "Oh, she she understands." Okay, that's a good thing because that awareness is the first step to change. So, reach out to me, leave me a comment. Tell me what's on your mind. You got a question you'd like me to answer at a future episode? Send it to Debbie@debbiecaudle.com. And remember, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to stay teachable. I'll see you in the next episode.